Hello, everyone, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are. Welcome to this Watson, Farley and Williams webinar today on the follow-up report to the Sustainability Imperative, Part 2, which will be published in 1 week from today. So that's on the 23rd of March. It's a follow-up to the initial report that we published just over 2 years ago. And today we have a really strong panel of senior decision makers from the maritime industry to discuss both the key findings which have come out from the report and also to debate the key issues regarding ESG from within the industry. So I'd like to introduce them to you now, even though they're going to be very well known to most of you. So we have Rasmus Bach Nielsen, the Global Head of Fuel Decarbonization at Trafigura, Giorgio Guadagna, Business Partner, Sustainability and Decarbonization at Stolt Tankers, Charis Plakantonaki, who's the Chief Strategy Officer at Star Bulk Carriers Corp, and Christos Tsakonas, the Global Head of Shipping at DNB. Now, I wanted to start the discussion today around the voluntary industry initiatives. And going to the report, what we found is that 3/4 of ship owners assessed that initiatives like the Poseidon Principles, the Sea Cargo Charter, the Maersk McKinney Moller Center for Zero Carbon Shipping, and the Getting to Zero Coalition have influenced their business over the last 2 years. So each of our panelists today has an involvement, and in some cases a very strong involvement in each of these voluntary initiatives. So I'll kick off initially with Christos, because Christos is one of the founding signatories to the Poseidon Principles, that his bank is, DNB. And what I want to ask him is to what extent these principles have had the effect that you intended when you initially became a signatory, and also then a follow-up as to whether you expect they're going to be expanded to deal with other aspects within the sustainability debate, such as recycling.
Thank you very much, George. To be honest, when we set it up, I'm not sure we knew exactly what we expected. We saw the world becoming much more conscious about ESG. We saw owners becoming much more conscious about the emissions of their ships. And, it was natural for banks to also start thinking, how do we make a difference here? How do we understand emissions in our portfolio? And I have to say, it has proved to be an extremely insightful initiative. And, we're grateful to Kristin Holt, my predecessor, and to Michael, who really championed this. The Poseidon Principles have enabled us to put a number on the emissions in our lending portfolio. It has helped us identify which areas we should be focusing more on. It has helped us to have very intelligent discussions with our clients about their transition plans, not only for the emissions, but we are seeing tremendous disruption in our sector. We expect new fuels, new engines, new trade types, etc. So the Poseidon Principles gave us the ability to have a very intelligent discussion and a basis to understand what was our clients' transition plan. There is still a very long way to go. We have a very ambitious targets that we have set, but it has been an extremely useful tool, which has also helped differentiate shipping internally in the bank, because we were one of the first industries that started measuring emissions. And I have to say, we are being copied by many other segments within our organization. So it was an extremely insightful and very, very forward-looking initiative. But there is still a long way to go.
Thank you, Christo. And just one other question then is, have you felt that the principles have had an effect within the industry, within your customer base? You mentioned now that it's enabled you to have these discussions and to focus on this issue, but have you seen a change in practice?
Absolutely. It is very, very clear that once you start measuring something, the next step is to start setting targets, start setting trajectories. You have to be compliant with these trajectories. Clients understand that. it becomes obvious that we will be prioritizing clients that are behaving in a certain way, that have certain transition plans. So it has had a very major impact in the industry, and I think it has helped alongside the other initiatives that you mentioned at the beginning, but it has definitely helped shape clients' thinking and the industry's thinking about how do we tackle emissions, how do we position our company, how do we fare when it comes to transition. So definitely it has made a very big impact on the industry. Okay,
thank you, Christos. If I can just turn now to Rasmus, because you are very heavily involved in the Sea Cargo Charter. And what I wanted to ask you is maybe just to give a very brief overview to the audience as to what you're focused on, and also what the critical challenges you think are in the year ahead.
Okay, absolutely. Thanks, George. First of all, the SCC, it's voluntary emission reporting. What the SCC does, it's similar to the Poseidon principles. It's establishing a baseline. And our industry has had a principal problem, like any other industry probably in the world. We haven't known what our CO2 emissions is or was, nor what our clients' emissions is or was. So the ACC is about establishing a baseline together with like-minded people who are not afraid of being public about emissions. If from a Trafigura perspective, and I just go in, why is SCC important? When you read annual reports from a lot of different ship owners, you don't know, and you're comparing apples and pears and bananas. What the SCC does is you ensure that you compare apples and apples. And that is what the industry as such has been missing. It is a comparison baseline. So that's the first aspect. In terms of members and going into like, what is the value? From our latest steering committee meeting yesterday, it was yet again confirmed from all participants basically that everybody, through learning and understanding the emissions, is growing confidence and growing knowledge and being better able to make decisions. So the members within the SCC are being confirmed that it's a very good place to be. So that leads on to what are the challenges in terms for our industry. And I think we are up against some big challenges because we have CII, which have come out, which for many industry participants, whether it's owners or charters, it's a very difficult tool. And CII is based on AER, annual efficiency ratio, whereas the Sea Cargo Charter is based on EEOI, so actual voyage emissions for each ship per voyage. And for us and for the SCC participants, this is an incredible difference. And actually this, we can only urge participants and future participants, the reason why to join is, as we get bigger and stronger, we can get a voice into why CII needs to be changed to EEOI. But one of the big challenges, we want to grow the member base from the current 35 signatures, and then we are satisfied having 35 signatures just 2 years in. But due to change in society and what's happening, we expect strong growth this year, and we look forward to that.
Thank you, Rasmus. Thank you very much. So that's a call to the other people in the industry to sign up to the Sea Cargo Charter. And Giorgio, you've explained to us that your company, it cooperates with the Maersk McKinney Moller Center for Zero Carbon Shipping. Can you explain to us the reason that the company took that decision and what you see the benefits? Because Christos and Rasmus have already explained with their voluntary initiatives where they see the benefits already and what they see for the future. So that would be useful to understand. Yeah.
Well, I think whether it's about sustainability or anything else, you often hear the stereotype that shipping companies and players in general in shipping are not that good at talking to each other and not that good at sharing knowledge. And I see that as a priceless added value that we have access to thanks to our work with the Maersk McKinney Moller Center. As Rasmus mentioned, the challenge the challenges that we have ahead of us are so huge, whether you look in terms of regulations, but I think in terms of the environmental challenge more in general. The challenge is so large and challenging, if you will, that it's really naive to think that anyone can make it on their own. And therefore, I think that's the real reason that the Zero Carbon Shipping Center is so valuable. It's, as far as I know, is one of the first experiments, if you will, where different companies from shipping, from ship owners to charterers to technology providers are physically sharing an office space day in and day out. And that to me has better odds at addressing the challenge than the traditional conference you can go to. This is the last 1 or 2 days, so it's really priceless for us.
Okay, thank you, Giorgio. If I can then turn to Charis, as your company is, part of the Getting to Zero coalition. And the aim of that coalition is stated to be getting commercially viable deep sea zero emission vessels powered by zero emission fuels into operation by 2030, which, when this debate first started, seemed a long way away. Now that's 7 years away. I'd like to understand also how the coalition is seeking to achieve this goal.
Right. Thank you, George. And thank you to the Watson Farley Williamson for inviting me to speak in this panel for a second year. So for those who are not familiar with the Getting to Zero coalition, we're talking about an alliance of more than 200 organizations across the shipping industry value chain. So not only ship owners and charterers, but also banks, classification societies, authorities, among others, similar to the concept that Giorgio mentioned about the Maersk McKinney Center. The coalition is managed by the Global Maritime Forum, which has a wider ESG scope, but Getting to Zero focuses on decarbonization. And Bulk, as partners of the Global Maritime Forum, we have been active participants in the coalition since its inception. Now, George, you asked about the way we work. The way we work with the other coalition members is that we participate in specific work streams. So, for example, one work stream could be new fuels and technologies, or how to motivate first movers. And in practical terms, the coalition helps bring together these different organizations and helps us kickstart specific projects. And to make this even more practical, I will mention one example, which is the Iron Ore Consortium, which we launched last year together with BHP and Oldendorf. This is a consortium which will aim to assess the feasibility of the development of a green corridor between Australia and East Asia using green ammonia. Now, this is a practical example of the projects that can be derived from this type of collaborations. And the second objective of the coalition is that, along with enabling such projects and partnerships, it also aims to inform and to support policy action related to greenhouse gas strategy and targets. And here, if I may make it more practical and give an example, we had the call to action for shipping decarbonization, which was launched and which advocates a net zero target for our industry for 2050 versus the 50% target of 2050, which is currently the case. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Charis. I mean, just on this, it's very interesting, what you've all said, and the benefits that you see. It's also interesting, just stepping back, that the four of you are participating in different initiatives. I think, if my understanding is right, that both the Getting to Zero coalition and the Sea Cargo Charter fall under the Global Maritime Forum. So, and I think Rasmus is nodding. But how effective do you think that these voluntary initiatives can be? And have you seen that there's been a real growth in that extent of collaboration? Because that's certainly something, and we'll touch upon this later, but which comes out from the report. And I know that, Giorgio, you said that, the stereotype of the shipping industry is that there isn't a great deal of collaboration, but these initiatives clearly show, and what we read and the results of the survey show, that that is changing. But just to focus on these voluntary initiatives, how important and effective do you think they can be? And can their individual goals, certain individual goals, be achieved by this alone? Or is it a case that these initiatives will be used to provide the right type of pressure or influence on the ultimate decision making? I don't know, and I see that I think Rasmus was ready to go, and then Giorgio after Rasmus.
Yes, no, SEC, we've been confirmed, is super effective. It's smaller shipping companies, for instance. It's difficult to allocate too much resources. It's all new. The SEC is a go-to place where you can gain a lot of knowledge. There's a secretariat, independent. So I think for smaller ship owners, this is actually a benefit where you can get alignment and participation and knowledge from a lot of big organizations who has more resources. So that's first. So it's actually supporting also smaller ship owners to succeed on the shipping decarbonization. Number two, how do you measure effectiveness and success? The fact that we all confirming to each other, we understand our missions better. And again, SEC is not about a ranking, and I don't think Poseidon principles neither. It's not about who scores what on an alignment score. It's about understanding your emissions so you can make better decisions in the future. So for me, and then we have been confirmed very much as a company, but that's also the feedback we get from all the participants. It's a great place to be, to push yourself forward. And that's what we're doing, and it will enable us to make better decisions in the future. So this is also why I'm super optimistic on behalf of SEC. Furthermore, we have the challenge with CII, which we believe is based on the wrong metrics. The stronger SEC is, then we can actually together, and SEC does have the power, or not have the resources to go towards IMO, etc., and promote and push EEOI measurements rather than AER. So I'm really optimistic on SEC, and I look forward to see the trajectory in the coming 12 months.
Thank you, Rasmus. So, Giorgio, if I can turn to you now.
Yeah, I fully agree with Rasmus. And actually, you mentioned, George, that we all have joined different initiatives, but we will be joining Chicago Charter shortly as well. So that's improving there. And I fully agree with Rasmus about the knowledge sharing. And I think if I may add a point to that, it's also about consistency and transparency. There are so many parties involved in the supply chain that it's hard to imagine that we will all address the problem in the same way and the same manner. And I see a lot of value there for within initiatives such as Chicago Charter, because they are the first step towards a standard that is aiming for higher transparency, and that's something that we need across the whole supply chain in view of the challenge we have in front of us. So I think that's a very important point. When it comes to the learnings and to the effectiveness of these coalitions, I don't expect this will be over overnight. This will be a long journey, and this is just the beginning. So I think we will see many more. I hope we will see many more. But I can confirm that we are learning so from the center, from our work at the center. We are learning so much from others, because at the end of the day, we are all in different position in the supply chain, but we have all common problems, and we are not always solving them in the same way, and that's a challenge, but it's also a chance to learn from each other. So that's how I would frame it.
Okay, thank you, Giorgio. I'll use that, your sort of emphasis on the challenge to move on to the next segment, which is the debate around alternative fuels and technology, and the technological uncertainty that exists, because and I know that I understand from what you've all described that, you know, part of the involvement in these initiatives is that you are, you know, liaising and working with technological providers or people who are providing, you know, sort of that developing that technology. But when it comes to alternative fuels, one of the things that we found in the previous survey was that LNG and LPG were listed as the clear favorites. So this is only just over 2 years ago, where around 60% of the respondents from the ship owner group, when they were asked about which alternative fuels they were considering in the next 5 years, responded LNG, LPG. This has fallen now really significantly to 35% in the latest survey. Now, we have certain explanations within the report itself, but it'd be good to get our panelists' input on this. So were you surprised by this? And what do you think the main reason around this may be? And I see that Rasmus is ready to respond.
I can try it quickly. I'm not surprised. The technology hasn't been there except for the methanol engine, but also in the IMO, there hasn't been. If you go 2 years back, there was not that much focus on what fuels we need to start burning in the future. IMO has only been tank to wake. Clearly now there's a very strong position leading towards full life cycle emissions, i.e. well to wake. And when you go for full way to wake, LNG is only about an 18 to 25% CO2 emission saving due to the methane slippage. So I'm not surprised at all. There's a lot of education which the industry has come by. And then again, we have a lot of projects which are potentially enabling the availability of zero emission fuels. Plus, we have a rapidly progressed IMO pricing, carbon pricing debate. And I think if you go 2 years down the road, it will be diminishing even further the positive view on LNG and LPG, because we need to transition to low and zero emission fuels.
Okay, thank you, Rasmus. I mean, what the survey showed is that actually biofuels are now viewed as an increasingly popular choice. And I don't know, Giorgio, if you want to respond, do you see this as a long-term solution for the industry, or do you see this again as a transitional measure? So using Rasmus's sort of analogy now, in 2 years' time, will that fade as well?
Well, specifically about biofuels, at the end of the day, they are one of the few options that are available here and now to start working on this challenge. So for sure, we see them as a bridging solution, if you will, because in the end, if you look at the fuels that are available now, it's conventional fuel, and then you have methanol, LNG, or biofuels. I see these as bridging fuels, but this doesn't necessarily mean that they will not be there in the long term. The honest answer is that nobody knows. I've really looked for our crystal ball here in the office, but I haven't found it yet. And so the only sensible approach, in my opinion, is to try and focus on the pros and cons of each fuels and on what we know about them, and to base our decisions and our strategy on that. I don't expect there will be one fuel that to rule them all, if you will, in the long term. There will be a mix of fuels, and so I think it's also in the best interest of the whole industry to step away from this whole what is the one fuel type of discussion. We just need to put them as close to each other as possible and aim for this apples to apples, as Rasmus put it earlier, level, so that we can compare them and make the best decision for the position we are in and for the segment we are in.
Thank you, Giorgio. I mean, looking at it, I mean, I'll now go to Christos just to get you involved in this debate. I mean, you are a financier. It was very clear in the previous report that, you know, how you saw the role of a financier when it comes to this debate, and given this very unclear picture, which is not surprising given where we are with the technology. I mean, what type of assessment does DNB make, or do you think financiers should be making when it comes to this issue? Because even within the survey, we saw that most respondents were choosing around 4 fuels as alternative sources, which sort of indicates the level of uncertainty. How does a financier deal with that level of uncertainty when they're presented with projects today?
Yeah, I think, first of all, George, I think you have structured this discussion very nicely, because we talked about a number of voluntary initiatives that people are doing, try to educate ourselves and understand the disruption that is coming to the industry. Then we moved to fuels and technology, illustrating the uncertainty and the lack of clarity of a path. And the question you have very eloquently put to me, I usually don't get it so nicely put. They say, new technology, will you finance it? Do you understand the risk, etc.? And the honest answer is that banks look at projects and they finance good projects that make that make good financial sense and make good returns. At the same time, of course, we have very strict criteria, and we are imposing very strict criteria on our environmental performance. So for me, when a project comes, we have to look at the cash flow, we have to look at the payout, we have to understand the technology. So if there is a project where Trafigura and Rasmus are willing to pay a long-term charter with very healthy rates, the risk becomes much easier to digest. If it is a project where there is a lot of uncertainty, there is not a long-term charter, it becomes more difficult for a bank to back it. And you have very ambitious trajectories, you have very ambitious targets, and yes, we want to meet them. At the same time, we want to make sound credit decisions so that in an environment of tremendous uncertainty, we do not end up making the wrong choices. And that is why the big question that is not answered in these type of discussions is who actually is going to be the one picking up the check. Is it going to be the banks taking the risk? Is it going to be the charterers picking up the risk? Is it going to be the owners? Is it going to be the yards? And is it going to be the regulator who is actually going to impose and put a price? And I think the answer is a combination of all this together. And in that framework, I can answer that absolutely a project that is balanced, banks, including ourselves, are there to finance it. And actually, we are incentivized to do so, and we are extremely keen to do so. But it has to be a balanced solution. And I don't think stakeholders can be looking to banks to take the risk in an environment of such tremendous uncertainty.
Okay. Thank you, Christos. I think you were very eloquent yourself there, so and very clear. So I want to use that to sort of as a platform to get the owner and charterer, let's say, perspective here in terms of how this is all balanced and who pays for this. Because I mean, I was at a conference last week where effectively someone from Charis's company, so that this was Hamish Norton, effectively said that right now, although the market says that we want ESG, we have that as a top priority, there's no real differential when it comes to having a more efficient ship being chartered, or there doesn't seem to be a premium for chartering out more efficient ships. So how do you see that this is going to play out? Are people going to pay more for more efficient ships? Are we going to see that the end user will end up giving a long-term commitment for the use of a more efficient ship and have a greater influence on the technology that's going to be used on that ship? Is there someone who wants to take that, or is it too? Okay, Charis.
Thank you, George. I'm happy to take that. So to answer your question, I think first we have to distinguish between short-term and the long-term, because the short-term targets of the industry are related to energy efficiency and to improve the energy efficiency of our fleet, there are existing solutions that a company can implement, whether these are technical or operational solutions that basically improve the vessel's performance, which means we reduce our fuel consumption, so we reduce also our bunker bill. So this type of investments pay back. So to answer the question, who pays for that? For the owner, it is an investment with a payback period. For example, if you retrofit your vessel with an energy saving device and this costs you, let's say, 2 million euros per vessel, then gradually you will be making this money back because you will be burning less fuel. So there the answer is pretty straightforward. It is an investment that pays back by itself. Now, if we look at the longer term, where energy efficiency will not suffice in order to meet the IMO targets, and then we're talking about green fuels, we're talking about green technologies like carbon capture and storage. So these are solutions that reduce emissions and are not related to your fuel consumption and your bunker bill, in the sense that they require the use of very expensive green fuels, which most of them are not available yet, and also retrofitting your vessels with very expensive technologies. If we're talking about seaport carbon capture and storage technologies, which again are not available and are currently in the making of. Now, if we talk about this type of solutions in the longer run, then this means a high capital expenditure for the ship owner, but also higher voyage operating expenses for the fuel itself. How are we going to pay for that? Of course, and this is where Christos and the banks come into play. Of course, the availability of green loans along with competitive financing terms will be important for ship owners to make the initial investment, but this is by itself is not alone. There will be a need for either subsidies from governments or from commercial agreements that will enable the ship owner to pass on the additional cost down to the end consumer. And now, whether we're talking about government funding or transferring the additional cost through charter parties down to the end consumer, ultimately it is a society that will bear the cost of the energy transition, either through taxation or through higher prices in terms of buying goods or products. Thank you.
If I may step in, and Charis, thank you for teeing it up this way. I think for banks, especially Western banks that are part of the Poseidon Principles, I mean, we are setting ourselves extremely tight trajectories that we have to meet. If you look at DNB, we have a public target to reduce emissions in our portfolio, the carbon intensity of our portfolio by a third in 2030. That's in 7 years. So it will be extremely difficult for us, if we are serious about meeting these targets, and we are, to finance ship owners and to finance vessels that are not doing these improvement initiatives that Charis outlined. And yes, there is a cost to it, but for us, it will be a binary decision. You're either moving your fleet into a cleaner path, which helps us meet the trajectory that we have undertaken to follow, or you do, and then financing is available for you, or you choose not to follow these initiatives because they are expensive, because you feel the time period, payback period does not make sense for us, in which case financing will not be available from DNB, and most probably from most of the Western banks that are keen to pursue such initiatives. At the same time, there will be, and we are in the process of developing incentives when it comes to transition financing. I think it's very difficult to label something green when you're transporting coal or when you're transporting oil, but certainly transition financing is something that we are definitely looking at. Sustainability linked financing, definitely it's something that we are already doing, but the decision is going to be binary. I think for Western banks, you either do what society perceives to be the right thing and meets the targets that the banks have set for their portfolios, and then you get financing, or you choose not to do it for whatever reason, and then it becomes extremely difficult for Western banks to including ourselves, to finance you or to make capital available to you.
Okay, thank you, Christos. I mean, what I'd like to do on using that as well as a sort of link to the issue of, because you and Charis, I think, and Charis made it clear that, okay, financing is one element to this. So even if you want to make the investment, using your Christos analogy now, that, you know, if people want to make that investment because they want to be able to have access to financing, that alone might not be sufficient, given the cost differential when it comes to green fuels. So, and that's what I'd like to sort of get to now, to see how that will be addressed, because the survey indicated that in the eyes of about a quarter of the industry, the pricing gap between green fuels and fossil fuels should be addressed by government subsidies and investment. Another 30%, however, think that ship owners will have to foot the bill. So in your view, who should and who will pay this difference? Rasmus?
Yeah, individual
Rasmus,
government.
you will pay it, or you want to answer?
We can't take it all, that's for sure. We may have to take a little bit, and I think the whole chain will have to take a little bit. And that's what you, going back to what you said, Christos, before, that there's an element of we all need to sacrifice a little bit in due course when these green fuels becomes available. 2 points: in order to make them available, we need them to be price competitive. They're not price competitive today. And it's not any individual government that needs to take action, it's IMO. Because we need that cost gap between fossil and non-fossil to be bridged. And I will go as far as saying that the depth of the discussions at the coming MEPC 80 in London will determine the legacy of Guadagna. It's a big statement, but I would say if IMO does not manage to progress significantly at the next MEPC meeting on net zero 2050 target, full life cycle assessment, and carbon pricing implementation. Again, we don't expect a final decision on this. That's not realistic, but we need deep discussions on this. And if we don't have that, in my view, that's going to negatively determine the legacy of Mr. Guadagna. Because the industry we need that cost gap to be bridged, because non-individual party today or combined can take that significant cost gap that we have on fossil and non-fossil. So we have to be realistic about that. And we see it with all the green fuels which are being proposed today. And I give an example. We have a green ammonia project in Norway together with a CIP, Copenhagen Infrastructure Fund, 20 billion euro renewable investment fund. Green euro potential offtake price around 900 euro to 1,000 euros. And the calorific value is 2.3 times less fossil fuel. So then people can do the math, what that price differential is. In order to do FID on this project, 200,000 tons, 210,000 tons, somebody needs to offtake this for 10 years in order for a bank to be able to finance this on a non-recourse basis. It is absolutely not realistic in today's environment. So then if we are to have access to the green fuels, and that goes back to when will the engines, the ships be ordered? Well, they will start to be ordered more and more when you have more certainty on the fuels being available. So, but to go back and sort of, it's a long, big topic. We very much need IMO action. And also we need full life cycle assessment, because we need to compare apples and apples on emissions, and we need to account for methane slippage. And again, I think everybody has to chip in, but it needs to be from a much smaller cost differential than what we see today.
Okay, thank you, Rasmus. I mean, Giorgio will follow now, but in your view, what is the, you're saying, okay, this lies with the IMO. What do people here? So maybe Giorgio, you can answer, how can that be dealt with? How can that price differential be narrowed? Is it through a carbon tax or levy? Is it through something like the EU's ETS system? Or is it something else? Or is it a combination of measures?
I think we will need a combination of regulations. A number of things have to fall in place. ETS is the first thing that makes apparent what kind of incentives are needed for the transition. But we will need more of those, because as Rasmus mentioned, this is, at this point, we can't really expect the market to fix the problem. The market needs to be guided somehow towards the goal. And I think this highlights again not only the importance of IMO and life cycle assessment, but also the importance of transparency and consistency, because all of these measures, all of these regulations, all of these decisions will need a solid input to be based on, and I think that's an equally challenging road that we have to take right now, because we don't only need the incentives, but we also need the transparency and the consistency in the data and in the numbers to then use such incentives to make solid decisions. And that's for everyone. I think it's for ship owners, for charters, and for financiers as well.
Okay, thank you, Giorgio. And given that we're now sort of touching on the role of the IMO, I mean, and Rasmus, you were very, very clear in what you said, and going back to what we were discussing at the beginning in terms of the voluntary initiatives and the role, and then also looking at the role of the industry associations, to what extent do you feel that they and you have the ability to influence the IMO in sort of framing the agenda, in sort of looking at the solutions which are available? Or is it the IMO which should be leading the way, and that the goal of the industry associations and the voluntary initiatives is to provide support to implement their targets and measures? And I know that, Rasmus, at the very beginning, you mentioned that, the Sea Cargo Charter, your view is that CII is the wrong measurement. So I'm not surprised that you want to answer this first.
Yeah, I can start. So SEC will not, as a policy influencer, not go in and push for carbon levy, etc. That's not for the SEC. SEC is about transparency, baseline database, and ship owners, operators, charters together. They can use this to grow knowledge and make better decisions around emissions. But where I think influence comes in is what Charis mentioned before: is they're getting to zero collision. There's the working groups within the GTZ, the Climate Policy Action Group, which we had a meeting today actually around how we affect the IMO, so IMO makes the right decisions. So there are a number of influential groups which sits actually also under the GMF umbrella. So each sort of umbrella organization has its own merits. But what the SEC does, as an example, like I think is the case for the Poseidon Principles, we bring knowledge awareness forward, which is pushing industry participants, including ourselves, to make better decisions. And I don't know, Charis, around GTZ, if you can add further comments around that, but
George, may I? Great. So I think it is very important to clarify that the IMO comprises member states. So basically, the ones voting in the IMO are the member states themselves. Now, the delegations, the member state delegations, they need to have guidance, they need to have shipping expertise. And in that respect, they benefit a lot from consulting, for example, with their national shipping associations on the different agenda items. They consult also with other industry associations. Many of them are also represented at the IMO. They may not have a voting right, but many industry associations are represented at the IMO. They do take part in the plenary. They do have a voice within the IMO. So of course the industry has a role to play and has the responsibility to provide guidance, expertise, advice, explanations, clarifications. Many issues are technical, and delegations, member state delegations, may not be familiar with those. Now, complementary to the work of the member states and the various industry associations, the initiatives that Rasmus also mentioned, like Getting to Zero Coalition, but also all the other fora that are currently taking place in the industry, and as we move on, we see more and more such initiatives coming into the industry, and this is great. The more, the merrier. They also have a very important role to play, because along with industry associations, these fora, these initiatives, they act as a placeholder for different constituents across the value chain. So you don't only have the voice, for example, of the charterer, of the ship owner, or of the classification society. You have a combined voice, which has taken into consideration different voices, different points of view across the value chain, which is a much more comprehensive position to take into consideration. So I will agree with Rasmus. These associations, these fora, have a very important role to play when I don't want to say influence, but I will use the word shape, when shaping, when advancing environmental regulations. Thank you.
If I can I comment on that?
Yes, please.
I think that's a great point. I do understand where the concerns about IMO come from, but it is super important for us to feed IMO with the specific comments about specific feedback about what kind of regulations we see, and that's again something that platforms such as the Getting to Zero Coalition or the Merce McKinney-Moller Center for Zero Carbon Shipping can help, is to help our feedback to IMO to be heard. But something we really need to be good at is to make our feedback as specific as possible, because if you take things such as CII, it's very easy to say that it's not the perfect metric, but we need to say why, and that's something that we see across different regulations. And for CII specifically, we have just written a paper about this. We really need to be specific about our comments so that we can put IMO in the best position to make the decisions, because if we expect them to make a magic solution for this overnight, it will take a long time.
Thank you, Giorgio. It's good. I mean, this part of the debate is very good, because I like, Charis, is your phrase about shaping the debate and rather than influencing, and the fact that and the survey shows this very clearly, that there is much more collaboration across various participants in the value chain. This debate is taking place, at a broader level than it has before, and it goes to Giorgio's point initially about, breaking those stereotypes of how shipping operates or has operated in the past. It seems, from what we are seeing from this report, but also, just reading the shipping press, how there is a much greater amount of collaboration and open debate. But then maybe just looking at, since we're concentrating on this and the importance of this MEPC meeting in July this year, what are you expecting from the IMO? What regulations are you expecting, or would you like to see, or where would you like to see the greatest clarity flowing from that meeting? So I don't know who wants to go first.
I can start. I think for us, the most urgent items are indeed CII. There are still a lot of unclear items about CII that needs to be clarified, because we are already working with it, and there are still lots of things up in the air. Not to mention the fact that CII is at this point defined only for a few years. So we will need to start thinking beyond those, given, again, the size of a challenge we have in front of us. And another example that I can think of is, again, biofuels. We spoke about them earlier. On the one hand, they are one of the few options that are available here and now to start doing our homework. But on the other, there is still a lot of lack of clarity about them in regulations. And from what we see from our trials, the actually burning biofuels and using biofuels and the whole practical aspects that come with biofuels are the easiest part, but everything that comes with them when it comes to regulations is still a huge challenge, and I really hope that we'll get more clarity there.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else who wants to take that, Rasmus?
Yeah, I mean, I think I said before, but it cannot be emphasized enough what we need from IMO. CI is important, but for us, it's very much a penalty on carbon, polluters pay. Then IMO needs to figure out, is it a fee-based? How does it get incorporated? The funds that gets collected, it's a challenge, but it can be overcome. Second, we need a net zero 2050 target, because that will enable the industry to get towards 2030 target of probably 5% emission, which we also believe we need, but for that we need a net 2050 target. And then we need full life cycle assessment on fuels and a global fuel standard. And if we get that, then I'm very optimistic that shipping can decarbonize to 2050 targets. But if we don't get these incorporated within the IMO, and I'm not expecting this MEPC to make decisions, but we need a deep, firm discussion leading towards decisions, if not at the following MEPC, then next year.
Okay, and can you see a situation where, the pace of the technological advances is such that actually it's the IMO which is coming in and chasing the tail of these advances? Could that be a possible scenario?
And it's funny you say it, because we had a big discussion earlier today in the GTZ. It's not a technology question any longer. You do have the methanol engine. The ammonia engine will be ready in 24 for delivery at shipyard 25. So we're no longer at the stage where it's a technology question. We know what the future fuels are looking like, at least the ones where it's low and zero emissions. It's most likely green ammonia, green methanol. And then there was a question in the chats, and I will just go into that, around blue. Blue will also have a future for quite some years. And obviously in the US, we now see the IRA, and we see blue ammonia being very competitively priced. It will come out, it will come into the shipping industry, we believe. And it will probably help support that there will be, available zero emission fuels in due course after IMO makes this critical decision on carbon pricing. So we get that cost bridge gap, or cost gap bridge. Thank you.
On blue fuels, I agree, and I think that's common to many other fuels. At this point, we don't have the luxury to exclude options. So any improvement, any step forward we can take has to be welcome, given the problem we have in front of us. So blue fuels will be part of the solution, probably more of a bridging solution than a long-term one, but we need to start from somewhere, because if we expect a perfect solution, then we will be waiting for a long time, and this is not going to get any easier.
Okay, thank you, Rasmus and Giorgio. We have another question which has come in from an anonymous attendee, saying some reports state that the money is not there to fund decarbonization in shipping. Today's discussion reiterates that there is a funding gap, but does the panel think the money will become available, whether through investment or finance, if the uncertainties surrounding regulation, fuel, and other technologies can be sufficiently resolved, notwithstanding that the cost is huge, or will there still be a gap needing subsidy in some form?
I guess this has my name on it, so I can answer. There are two things that are happening, and I don't think we should leave this panel with people confused. There is always money for good projects, and there is always capital for good projects. That's the first thing. The second thing is Western banks at least, are heavily incentivized to follow trajectories which support green or transition type investments. So there is capital available for the right projects, but you need other parts as well for these projects to make sense, which comes back to the first thing I said. There is always money for good projects. So if something is packaged well with a good charter, with a good employment, with the right type of engines, banks are definitely there will definitely be there to finance them. But not only that, if people stick with the old technology, because of the trajectories banks are adopting for decarbonization, we will not be able to make capital available for such projects. Now, how do you make new technology projects economically viable? Is it through voluntary initiatives? Probably not. It will have to be some sort of regulation. It could be carbon pricing, it could be carbon taxes, certainly carbon trading. Once you start putting a price on the carbon, I think that is inevitable. And I think this is what eventually is going to help bridge the gap between the financial gap between the two. But when it comes to incentives for financial institutions, they are definitely heavily geared towards transition and green investments and away from traditional polluting technologies.
Thank you, Christos. Does anyone else want to add something to that in terms of thank you, Rasmus.
Yeah, I can quickly add. CIP, our partner in Norway, they are today managing 20 billion euros. They expect to manage 100 billion euros in the future, indicating that they will have access to the funds, A, B, against the right business opportunity, which is where people can offtake the fuels, then projects will materialize. So I'm confident funds can and will be available subject to the right economics being in the industry. And here we need to go into the IMO.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't know if there's any other question. We don't have any other question which has come in, and we're coming up, we're a couple of minutes before the end of the discussion. So I think it's a good time to wrap things up. I mean, as we discussed with the panelists in advance of the discussion today, we could have spoken for many, many hours about the issues, about the issue of ESG and how that impacts the shipping industry and what's happening within the industry. I think it's been a really good discussion because we've got an insight into what people are doing, the voluntary initiatives which are taking place, the level of clarity which is being sought by the industry from regulators, the technological advances, and also, a key element of all this is also the funding side. And so I'd like to thank everyone for their contribution today, and for those of you who joined us and listened in. And as I said, we're publishing a report in a week's time. We will, we do encourage you to read it and then and hope that it is something that you will find of interest. And lastly, I just want to thank all the panelists for giving their time, both towards the preparation of the report and in today's panel as well, which I've really enjoyed. So thank you very much.